Hey Sarah, how are you?
Good. How are you? I'm a little tired. We had a bit of a crazy week. We had our roof is getting repaired and it rained and it wasn't quite sealed up properly, so we ended up having our building flooded and had to do a
I
bunch of
saw the pictures. Yeah,
yeah, thankfully no damage. Just a big mess to clean up, and then we had to put all the rubber flooring back down, so that was really obnoxious, but everything's done and good, and the roof repair continues. Yeah.
right. Yeah. It's been hot here, so as you can see, AC back here just trying to stay cool. We had a little bit of a reprieve with some rain, but it's right back up into high
It
90s.
again, yeah. I'm like, oh, it's time to retreat back inside. I have to take the dogs out for a swim later, but yeah, no
Yeah.
fun.
Awesome. Okay, so we are into part two of hopefully what's either going to be a two-part or maybe even three-part series, who knows, of these little short shows that we're doing with Get Your Sit Together. I believe that we had left off talking about the different groups of dogs, and we had started into toy dogs and then had to wrap up. So why don't we go ahead and take off with that again? I think we are talking
Right.
about autonomy. These dogs are bred for like resource guarding, alert barking, and how people tend to, overlook and because of their size, not really respect these dogs, I think.
Yeah, I think that was kind of like where we left off. They do tend to get like manhandled a lot, so they can end up with a lot of handling aggression because of that. Like, things that you would never do to a larger dog. And I think we talked about this before, but if it's a bit of a review to start off with, I think that's okay. The toy dogs are all like kind of smaller versions of other breed groups, so you get a lot of variation as far as like what their prey sequence is. Like some are kind of like small terriers, so they have like a very almost intact prey sequence, like other terriers. And then some of them will have more of like a spitz predatory sequence. And some of them, like we can have our small hounds where they're toy breeds, but they're also very functional, drivey working dogs, and they have, the hound predatory sequence. So they vary a lot on that, but generally bred for companionship. And like way back in the day, they were bred a lot for like guarding and protection. So you get a lot of owner directed resource guarding. Very easy to spoil them because they're tiny and adorable. A lot of alert barking. So those are kind of other common issues that you see with toy breeds.
Yeah, absolutely. So don't discount the toy breed, I think is really, what it comes down to.
Yeah.
Um,
And like,
so we
I
got
don't
a
know
few.
about you, but like sometimes I see a lot that people just want them to be a couch potato lapdog, but they're actually like, I gotta do stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, they're derivatives of other breeds of dogs. So you get your Spitzy type toy breed, you get your Terrier type toy breed, you get your whatever. Like it's not. Yeah, they expect because of their size. They're like, oh, they don't need a lot. They're easy to manage, and they think that a toy breed just means that they're gonna just sit around and be a couch potato. And I agree with you on that one. That is not necessarily the case. I personally have a toy breed that would be happy to be a couch potato, and he does do flyball, but I mean that was a 7 year kind of
Right.
journey, and he only likes it because his other dog friends do it. Otherwise, he's happy to be a couch potato, and he's also not a full bred. He's a mixed breed, so you never know what genetics you get in that. So we have some other ones to go through, and I know that we want to get into some other concepts today as well. So let's talk about scent hounds, our favorite baying, long-eared.
How do you feel about scent hounds?
I'm noise sensitive,
Me too.
so I think they're really great. I've met some really awesome ones. They're biddable, they're trainable, they're meant to work in a group. I've met some that are resource guarders, but they're usually dogs that are inside of a city that don't get their needs met. But yeah, really loud. You either love it or you don't.
Yeah. I like
Yeah.
one of those types of dogs that I'm like, I love them, but like not in my house.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're really interesting because they tend to be like quite social and like they really love their people and they tend to be for the most part like dog social. So like on that way they make great pets and they can be quite low key and lazy too. The thing that they were bred for is like tracking prey with scent. And they're really interesting because like unlike a lot of well actually most breed groups they have kind of like a part of the prey sequence that was almost like added in that you don't really see in wild animals. And what they do is they kind of like they seek, so they search for the prey by scent. And when they find it, basically like everything else tunes out. They're only focused on tracking that scent. And the part that's added in is something called marking. So basically they orient and then they find the prey and they mark. So marking is not something that wild canines would do because it would scare the prey away, but it's something that was bred into scent hounds where they had GPS so that they could tell
where they had
when
treed their prey
or,
up. Yeah,
and then they
before
basically
GPS, you had to echolocate your dogs.
they stand there and scream. So that is like literally what their genes tell them to do is to smell, track, filter out all other stimuli when you are on a scent, and then scream about it. So
Yep.
you can imagine that that can present some difficulties when those genetic tendencies get switched on. Like obviously off leash recall can be hard for them because they will not hear you when they're on a
Yeah,
scent.
it's not that they don't want to hear you; they
They
literally
don't.
cannot hear you. Yeah,
That like, that is turned off. It is only nose. And what their genes tell them to do is literally filter out all that stimuli and focus on tracking that scent until you tree it and then scream about it. A lot of their positives is they're generally very good for handling. They accept handling because they've been bred for that. Again, they're bred. A lot of them are bred to be in groups of other dogs, so they usually don't have any dog aggression. Certain breeds can be a little bit more like stranger danger, but usually they're really good with their people. But yeah, the like whole like taking them off leash thing can be a real challenge. Uh,
absolutely.
the rest of their predatory sequence is very reduced because basically once they find it and scream at it, they don't progress any
Yeah,
further.
there's not a kill shake sequence. There's not a grip and hold sequence.
Yeah.
It's literally,
Search,
track it, yell at it.
orient, search, orient, chase, mark, right? So
Yep.
yeah, very, very interesting. Um,
All right.
I'm such
So,
like I always think that stuff is really cool. As I'm just like,
oh,
how
it's
do
so
you do
fascinating.
that? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's
Well,
so
hopefully the
fascinating.
rain doesn't get too loud.
I didn't hear anything.
Okay.
Um, let's talk about gun dogs next. I have some experience with gun dogs. They're a pretty wide, robust, not breed. What are we talking? What is it? Group.
Yeah.
Wide,
Like
robust group of dogs. So
gun dogs are like our hunting dogs, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
They're very popular as companions for very good reason. Generally extroverted, generally like not super sensitive about the environment. Dog friendly, people friendly, very biddable. Just kind of like nice dogs, but they can have a lot of energy, especially like some of the like pointers and setters. And if
Yes.
you've ever met a young field line lab, holy cow, get out of the way, right? Uh,
Yeah. Oh, I love those dogs. They're intense though.
yeah. And then so I'm not a gun dog expert, so please don't come at me if I get this wrong. But there's kind of different groups of gun dogs. So they're like how their pre-sequence has been modified is going to vary depending on what they were bred for. So
Yes.
there's retrievers. So what they're going to do is they're going to go out and grab the prey, usually birds, and bring them back to the hunter. So they're going to have that kind of strong, like going and getting it. It's a grab bite, but it's modified. So
It's modified. It's soft. Yeah.
and then the retrieve is kind of trained, but that like grab and hold is really like the chase and the grab is really modified. So you get that dog who just loves to retrieve, like they love to do it. It's their favorite thing. And then what kind of can go along with that as a genetic tag along is like resource guarding, right? Because you're kind of breeding possession, right? Anytime we're breeding for like I want to hold this and I want to keep it,
Yeah.
sometimes the genes that we select for that also can create resource guarding. So you can
Yeah,
see
I see that more commonly in like golden
gold
retrievers. It's a retrieving
retriever.
dog, but you'll get some lines that are a little bit more possessive than
Yeah.
others. They still have a soft mouth, but they're like, this is my soft, right?
And
Especially if their needs or training isn't really met.
the more indiscriminate the breeding gets, the more likely you are to
Oh
have
yeah.
behavior problems. Whereas, like someone who is breeding for a functional working dog probably would not want that, so it wouldn't
Yep.
really show up in their bloodlines. But someone who's just like, I'm breeding golden retrievers together without a lot of thought is
Yeah.
going to be more likely to produce the resource guarding. So there's retrievers. What else is there? There's setters, retrievers, setters,
There's
pointers.
setters, pointers. The setters there's flushing dogs. I know that there's dogs that just go and flush. I don't know
That's
what
your
they're.
scent, and they
Yeah,
basically can't find them.
yeah, that's the setter, right?
Them fly out of the bush, and then the hunter shoots them, and they don't do anything
Yeah,
with that.
yeah,
Hunters will find them and mark, right?
yep,
So the setters are doing a lot of scenting, so a lot of the searching and the orienting. And then the pointers have that exaggerated orient mark, right? So that like
yeah.
beginning, it's like stop, but they freeze. So
It's
it's
a freeze. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
like a border collie.
Scenting or orienting and then marking, but the marking is more of a freeze behavior rather than like a loud.
Yeah, and they basically they start to go into stalk. So we don't really want chase, we want stalk. So they
Yeah,
spot and then they freeze. It's like that stalking of the prey
I'm
before.
sure a lot of listeners has probably seen because it's all gone viral. And I've seen a lot of pet people talk on it too. It's like those puppies, those pointer puppies on the flirt pole,
Exactly,
and they're literally just stop
creeping
motion
and
kind
then
of end. Yeah, yep, exactly.
and that's
Um,
that's on a bird wing, I think. So it's even like the sense.
yeah,
I don't
yeah,
know if
they'll
that.
do it.
I think that's just imprinting, but I think they respond to the movement, which is really cool.
Yeah.
Um, what else is there? I feel like there's always one.
Oh,
Spaniels. We forgot about spaniels.
oh yeah, yeah.
Will kind of, I believe, work like a setter, but they also can retrieve.
Yeah, there's a couple of spaniels on our flyball team, and as puppies, they did a lot of that like flushing behavior, which is just like zooming, but their nose is to the ground. You know, it's very interesting to watch. And also within those spaniels and setters and whatnot, you'll get a lot of like crossover dogs that are kind of designed to do pointing and retrieving or flushing and retrieving as a part of their cycles. I know that duck trolling retrievers is like a pretty unique type of breed and when it comes to gun dogs and hunting. So
Yeah, the tollers were actually like bred to lure the ducks. Yeah, which is really
yeah, which is like a complete opposite of the other
yeah,
ones, which are flushing and getting. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. It's very interesting, and that's called tolling, and that's why they're called a duck toller. And I believe they're the only breed that functions that way. So very, very interesting. I don't understand what it looks like well enough to say what parts of the prey drive it is. Really, really, definitely an interesting and unique breed.
yeah, it is fascinating once you get into the details of it. Like how I wouldn't even know where to begin. Honestly, I know what I'm doing as a trainer, but I wouldn't even know where to begin to be like, that's the trait. I see that. I want that one.
Right.
So yeah,
It would
um,
be like shaped over generations, right? So
yeah. So, gun dogs and guardian dogs, I think, are, the two biggest classes of dogs when it comes to sort of, at least, I know you're from Canada, I'm from America, but when we think about American culture and American development, I think those would probably be like the two really big ones in terms of, development and progress and breeding. I mean, not to discount scent dogs or our next class of dogs, which is terriers, which is my favorite class of dogs. I am a terrier bulldog person. I love terriers, and terriers are affectionately called terrors.
forward.
For good reason. They're broad from being, the barn dog who's keeping down the rat population to the New York City dog that is keeping down the vermin population as
Right.
well. And they're really sort of bred to orient as well. And then their predatory sequence is all about the kill shake. Most terriers are doing really good with the kill
Yeah.
shake and then letting it go and going on to the next one.
Yeah,
So,
they also don't do any stalking. So stalking is they're
nope.
all business, right? So it's find it, chase it, kill it, and off you go, right?
And off you go.
I
Exactly.
want to say one more thing about gun dogs because we didn't really
Oh, yeah.
too much about behavior issues that can show up with them. I mean, they're generally great dogs. Like these are the breeds that I'm like, you want a family dog, like
Yeah.
go for a gun dog. I think that their energy level can overwhelm people, especially the working lines. Show
Yes.
and pet lines tend to be a little bit more low key. But the working lines, like they can really be like Energizer bunnies, and especially when they're young. Like I just think about like I haven't really been able to have like German Shorthair pointers in daycare because their energy level is so high that even though they're not doing anything offensive, they get everybody's arousal up so much because they're literally
Yes.
running
Because they're
circle
literally just vibrating all the time. Yeah.
dogs to aggress towards them. Like they just need so much physical exercise. And like I have herding breeds that need a lot of physical exercise, and those young sporting dogs like need more. So I think
Yeah.
people underestimate how much physical exercise they need and struggle with that. And then sometimes like a lack of impulse control, especially with younger gun dogs. And then some of the like difficulty tuning into the handler when they're like really kind of their scent instinct is
Oh
kicked.
yeah, especially those setters and pointers.
Yes.
Those are more difficult than say your retrievers. Your
Yeah.
retrievers are a little bit more.
Retrievers
They
are,
still need impulse control,
they're
but they're
more,
more handler oriented. Yeah.
yeah.
So, and then you get breeds. So some of the other ones that I've come across, like Weimaraners and Vizslas, especially in cities, they could be incredibly nervous wrecks if
Yes.
their needs aren't met. It usually will transfer into like separation anxiety issues. Met some spaniels or setters that will have like light chasing issues
Yeah.
if their needs aren't met, if they aren't worked properly, because they're just looking for anything. Because it's not just a scent thing; it's that flushing is also a visual thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that can be an issue as well as like again, when you're breeding indiscriminately, those genetics might just kind of come out and overpowered because it wasn't, thought of or read out of, on top of everything else. So,
Yeah, or you get, you're breeding Weimaraners because they're pretty and they end up being, totally anxious, hyperactive messes. So
yeah,
a
yeah,
lot of energy in there, and it can go sideways really easily if people aren't really being careful about what they're producing temperament wise.
yeah, yeah. So back into
You
back into terriers.
terriers.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different terriers. There's Patterdales. I think the one that most people probably are more familiar with are things like the Jack Russell. Jack Russell Terrier is really common. Wishbone, anybody? I grew up on that. The cool thing about like terriers is that they're a lot of them are really bred to go to ground. Even your Dachshunds are bred to go into small holes, be able to turn around, kill, shake, all of that.
And
And it's
Dachshunds
what I
are a hound terrier blend, right? Like,
yeah, it's like a Hound Terrier blended. But yeah, the cool thing about them is that they go 0 from 100. Just like, guardian breed dogs. You kind of want a dog that's like, if nothing's going on, they're going to chill out.
yeah.
But the minute they catch into something, mice in the wall or whatever, they're going to turn on, they're ready to go. And they literally will go from 0 to 100.
And they
Right.
won't,
And their genetics scream about that. Huh?
and they won't stop.
And they won't stop.
No, very
Um,
tenacious, right? Yeah.
very tenacious. And I think that's the thing too, is like just speaking on like behavior problems, some of the things that I run into, and I know that you'll be able to speak on this as well, is like dog aggression can be somewhat normal. They are driven to conflict. That is what they do. The kill shake is conflict. So they're driven to that. And if their needs aren't met through things like tug or flirt pull or whatever, they'll often redirect that to dogs or even handlers sometimes too. That seems to be the most common one that I have in terms of working with terrier owners is
Yeah.
dog selectivity or dog aggression.
I would say kind of the same. And then with terriers, like they're really great pets because they're usually lovely to their people and they're a bit more independent. So if you don't want like a dog that like that's the thing with like some of the gun dogs is they're gonna be like and if
A
you don't
little clingy
like that
sometimes, yeah.
clingy dog, then a terrier is a really nice option. They don't really have environmental sensitivity, but they are more independent. So like obviously aggression to small animals can be an issue. Aggression to dogs simply because they like won't back down from a
Yep.
challenge. Like if another dog
No.
steps to them, basically they're gonna
Yeah, I mean these
all right,
dogs
bring
aren't
it
just
back. Yeah.
yeah, these dogs aren't just ratters. They also take
Yeah.
on badgers. I mean,
And
badgers are gigantic. Like
they do need some exercise. Like they need to
yes.
do something. So not really like you said, they have good off switch, but they do need to do stuff. Might not
Yes.
be great off leash because of the prey drive, unless you're a really skilled trainer. They do like to do all kinds of dog sports. And then some of the other issues would just be like maybe handling aggression. Because again, like if they get pushed, they might be a little bit more quick to come back and fight. And like, yeah, I would say like again, prey drive issues, like weird behaviors like reacting to things in the house or the environment that are triggering that prey drive inappropriately, like noises and things like that. So sometimes some seemingly weird behaviors that get triggered off of that, but that's fairly rare.
Yeah, and I would say that in terms of predatory sequence, there are terriers who are bred to do marking, so they can be loud. If you think about
Well,
Earth
like
Dog, which
on the
is
ground, right?
yeah, exactly.
Dog is, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So with Earth Dog, these dogs go to ground. They can't always reach their prey, so they just bark. And basically, before GPS was a thing, the handlers would have to literally dig their dogs out of the earth
Yeah.
when locating
I
them.
was
So
thinking barking can be an issue and maybe some reactivity because they can have a low frustration tolerance because they want
exactly.
to go, right?
They just want to go, and if they can't reach what they're going for, they will immediately go into barking and thrashing and all the things, grabbing things in their mouth. Because if you've looked at any Earth Dog trials, the ones that as a sport now, they're behind these wooden dowels inside of a cage is your what they call a quarry. And a lot of these dogs aren't only just yelling, they're also grabbing these wooden dowels. So that barrier frustration is a real thing with these dogs as well.
Yes. Yeah.
So
So definitely something to be aware of and like kind of work to mitigate as you're raising the dog from a puppy, ideally. Did you want to move
yeah.
to bulldogs? We love a bulldog.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and move on to bulldogs. Obviously, most people are probably going to think about like the English bulldog, the short faced, unhealthily bred dog that is just a couch potato, but they have their own behavior problems as well,
I
if their
mean,
needs aren't met.
I
So
could talk probably for 10 minutes just specifically on English bulldogs and their behavior issues.
yes,
I think they're the coolest dogs, but I feel
same.
so bad for them because they have been bred so extremely that I think that their
Yes.
existence is uncomfortable. And like
Oh
I have
yeah.
worked with a lot of really gnarly bulldogs, like behavior issues, and I think it's just because they're in pain, right? Like
Yeah. Absolutely.
I was in pain all the time too. But I think what you were gonna expand into before I interrupted
Yes.
is that there's more than British bulldogs. So the bulldogs, when we're
There are.
talking about this as a group, is just like kind of a group of dogs that was bred for the thankfully now extinct and illegal sport of bull baiting. So they would
Bull baiting. Yeah.
dogs basically to fight bulls. Sounds like a great time. And so they're big,
I mean, I don't want to fight a bull. I guess if back in the day you'd want to send your dog
powerful,
in.
extra large, big, powerful dogs.
Yes.
Again, similar to a terrier, they're going to go into that conflict. They're bred to be like fearless and resilient and like not afraid to take things head on. It's very brave, powerful dogs. Um,
Absolutely.
like American Bulldog, those are like definitely an example of a bigger one. I think like all the Dogo Argentinos and stuff are similar. And a lot of these dogs now that are like still around and working are going to be finding employment as like boar dogs. So killing those like kind of
Yeah.
the boars, and they're very good at it.
Yeah, and what's fascinating about that in terms of like your bulldog, a lot of these dogs are also prone to dog aggression, but there's so many different classes of bulldog. So like your American bulldog is probably a little bit more towards like the guardian dog
Yeah,
slash bulldog. Then you've got your American pit bull terrier, so
they're
terrier slash
very
bulldog. Your Dogo Argentinos, from what I understand, and I'm not an expert on this at all, but they are bred more for boar baiting. But to do boars, you have to work as a team, so they're a little bit more oriented and can be somewhat dog social if trained appropriately and socialized appropriately. Whereas like your American Pit Bull Terrier is definitely a lot more or like a lot less social when it comes to other dogs. I will have a lot more dog selectivity and dog aggression in them. I think some of the
and they're
biggest traits
gonna,
are just
again, it's not necessarily that they're gonna just be born hating other dogs, but if they get pushed into conflict, their genetics are going to tell them to rise to that occasion.
they're less likely to back off. Yeah, like Archer is my American Staffordshire English Bulldog mix. He is very very dog neutral. He does not care about dogs. He can be somewhat social with dogs if one piques his interest, but if a fight breaks out somewhere, my goal is to get him first because it literally just goes from 0 to 100 and goes, I'm getting involved in that. And it's just genetics. It's just genetics. And he also doesn't like cows because
Right.
his inner genetics go, I must hang off of you.
And I think with bulldogs, the prey drive is really interesting. Like basically they're just going to kind of go into grab, bite, and hold. Like
Yeah.
they don't have a lot of like searching. They don't have a lot of like orienting. Like that would all be like not super functional because of like how like what they were bred for. But
Yeah.
they do go right into like chase and grab.
Yeah, there's a lot of stillness behind it, and it literally is a little bit more visual than anything else. So see, uh,
Orienting, right? Orient.
yeah, exactly, yeah, oriented, but it's with their eyes more than their nose, and then literally goes in and grabs. And then you'll also get like some bulldogs will prefer like hind end grabs, neck grabs, cheek grabs, ear grabs. Like there is a preference in terms of that depending on the line, depending on the genetics, and that also I find very fascinating. So
And so like issues with these dogs, powerful dogs, definitely can be prone to move into conflict, which can be difficult for a lot of people. And they can have like high arousal issues.
Oh yeah, impulse control issues,
They
arousal
all
issues,
aggression.
barrier frustration issues, and also probably I would say even more so with the leash as well because they're kind of bred to pull into stuff, kind of like huskies and harnesses. Not that harnesses encourage pulling, but if the bulk of their body has more power, they're going to continue to feel more comfortable in
Yes.
that and continue to push.
And
So
then because a lot of them were also bred as like guarding dogs, so like guarding the property, you can see a lot of those guardian dog tendencies in them,
absolutely.
like stranger danger, territorial behavior, difficulty with people coming to the house. If you don't socialize and train them well, you can have some fear aggression issues too. So,
Absolutely, absolutely. Awesome. Okay, let's go into herding dogs, which I know is your
oh,
MO. You've got a lot of
yeah,
herding dogs.
I love them. I just think like I really like dogs that really want to work with me, that are like easy to train, and like that are like snuggly. So herding dogs for me are awesome. And again, there's like a huge variance in herding dogs, especially like depending on what style of herding they were bred for. Like a lot of the more primitive ones don't do the like border collie style where they can like go out and bring the livestock back. But what they'll do is they'll work behind the livestock with the humans and basically push them along, or they'll like push them out of fences and things like that. So a lot of
Right,
like,
yeah, because sheep
yeah,
tend to be a little bit more flighty, so you don't need to.
well, they did it
Yeah,
with cattle too, right? So, but
sure.
cattle bred dogs are going to be pushier, right? So they're going
Yes.
to like move into conflict. They're going to move into pressure. These like a lot of the breeds, you'll find that they'll follow people around and nip them on the back legs, either like people that are in their family, or like if they're nervous about a guest, they'll do that often, where the guest gets up
Yeah.
and then they'll go in for that little, snipey bite. Depending on the breed, they can have territorial issues. Some of them were also bred to be kind of like all around farm dogs where they kind of guard the property as well. So they can be suspicious.
Yeah, Aussies. I work with a lot of Aussies, and I'm like,
Yes.
well, not just herding dog, also guard
Yeah,
dog.
but
Yeah.
border collies not so much, right? Like border
No.
collies, I mean, obviously they're going to vary, but they tend to be a little bit more stranger social. Lots of issues with high physical needs, high mental needs. They're very environmentally sensitive, especially when they're poorly bred. They can have a lot of reactivity and anxiety issues. So they're like brilliant dogs, but they also are very difficult to handle and train. And it's very difficult for them to exist in a lot of human environments because they get sensory overload. And I'm like, oh, yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
right. I got this.
yeah, yeah.
And so I totally empathize with them. But
Absolutely. I mean, chasing behaviors are an issue, like cars, scooters, bikes,
any
joggers.
chasing it because they want to
Yeah.
chase, they want to control movement, right? So anything,
Control movement, exactly.
yeah,
Also, just
anything
being
that
incredibly sensitive to changes in their environment. They're more visual, so as something's being a little flighty out the way, they're gonna like focus in on it more.
pressure
Um,
sensitive, because
Pressure sensitive, yes.
really that's how they work stock, is like feeling where the stock is moving, and you just want to push the stock so that they're not running. Like that's all kind of, they work that flight zone. So they're really sensitive to people getting in their space and other dogs getting in their space as well. Their prey sequence is really interesting. Again, it's
I
going
was literally just gonna tell me more about the prey sequence because you
so
mentioned stalking, which is like
yeah.
pointer stalking, herding stalking, a little bit different.
So with herding breeds, they don't really do like a lot. They love scenting, I find, but it's not really part of herding. So they're very visual. And they're gonna like scan the environment a lot. So basically, they kind of orient, and then what they do is they go into like a modified like stock behavior. So they'll go out and they get behind the sheep, and their genetic kind of baseline is to bring the sheep to, or the sheep or the cows to the handler. For the ones that do fetching, so like Aussies, Kelpies, Border Collies, that's going to be kind of their default behavior, is to
Yeah.
bring them to you. And what they do is they use like a modified stock. So they're slowly and carefully and thoughtfully moving, and then the handler kind of just puts them where they want them to go if they want the animals to go in a different direction.
Yeah, I mean, there is a great amount of division of attention when it comes to a cattle dog versus, like, say, a pointer, because they're not only having to pay attention to what's happening in front of them, but they have to take direction from the handler who's like, well, you got to move them over to the left or you got to go. Yeah. So,
And yeah, what's really interesting with herding dogs is like they do get really aroused by chasing living objects, but like when you're actually doing herding training, like it is about kind of teaching them to control their arousal around livestock, because you really don't want chasing. So generally you want the dog like thinking, and when they're thinking, they kind of slow down and then they'll go more into that like stalking and sort of working the flight zone a bit more, instead of just chasing the animals around and making them stressed and run. Then they kind of like they do the stalking, really want it to kind of like be decreased after that because we don't want chasing, we don't want biting, except there's very certain circumstances where it is acceptable for a herding dog to nip livestock. And that would be like a very obstinate animal that's not moving, generally more common with cattle, but they can
Yeah.
just be biting them all the time. So it's
No.
very important that but that's part of their makeup. So they can be likely as companion animals to bite when under pressure.
Yeah,
The
100%.
thing is
Yeah.
teaching them like that's not an appropriate place to use your mouth. Like you have to have self-control there, but this is like where you can do that. And I think one thing that's really, really cool is like watching like really like well-bred herding dogs is they even know like they can tell when like animals are babies, and they will react totally different to baby animals and to mothers than they will to like adult animals. It's so cool, and it's just all instinct, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've definitely seen that. One of the other things that just to touch on real quickly is like the different builds. So, like, you've got your cattle dog, and so they're going to be a little bit more robust. Even within border collie, you've got cattle border collie versus sheep border collie. And I know a lot of people who do sport herding and they won't put their cattle border collies on sheep because it's
They're too
different.
pushy, and that's like
They're
what
too pushy, exactly.
to be like that too. They're bred to work everything. So like they can be really strong cattle dogs because they can push, but then if you want them to work sheep, you have to really kind of teach them to like slow down
Yeah,
off a bit. Whereas a border collies that's sheep bred, you have to teach them to put pressure on.
yeah, yeah. That I find fascinating. And in terms of like behavior problems, might be a little bit different too. Like chasing
Yeah.
is really a big thing for more so for sheep ones, but some of the problems I've run into with cattle type dogs is a little bit more dog selectivity,
Yeah.
willing to go into conflict a little bit easier. We don't get the grip and hold, but you might get, multiple
Yeah.
bites or
Yeah.
multiple nips, and they're more face oriented than feet oriented, which I always kind of find fascinating too. And yeah, with cattle dogs, I feel like you really have to, like your blue healers and stuff, I feel like you really have to work harder with them in terms of having them realize that you also have good ideas because they're a little bit more independent than say like your border collie.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
okay, so I don't want to run
One
too
more.
much over, but I want to go ahead and finish out with our world dogs and then also touch on mixed breeds because that's probably going to be more common. But I'm going to let you lead with the world dog one because I'm not as, you know,
So world dogs are a really interesting group. And what a world dog is it is kind of like they actually make up most of the world's dog population. These are
I wonder why that's why they're called world dogs, huh?
well,
Sorry,
world
I'm
dogs.
just being
These
sarcastic.
are dogs that have been developed by natural selection and not human selection. So these are
Yes.
dogs who generally live alongside humans, but not necessarily with them. I mean, some of them will like kind of live with people, like they'll kind of be there, but they have a lot more free roaming abilities. Um, some of the populations do get purebreds mixed in, but in general, like what a world dog is the pariah dogs that kind of like exist alongside humans. They are scavengers. So because they're scavengers, they actually really don't have a lot of prey drive, which is interesting.
Yeah.
And they have developed simply just from like cohabitating with humans, and they filled this scavenger niche ecologically. They tend to be mid-sized, brown, prick ears, short hair, and sometimes a curly tail. They all generally look really similar, which is interesting.
Yeah, they're pretty homogenous for their region. So
Yeah.
like in, colder climates, you're gonna get a lot of like, fluffier dogs, but they're all
Mhm.
pretty homogenous looking, similar colors,
And
similar
different
builds. So
areas have like their own breeds, like an East Asian village dog, which is local to a certain region, has its own genetic fingerprint compared to like a village dog from another part of the world. So they actually have a genetic fingerprint or thumbprint or profile that is unique to them
yeah.
and differentiate it from other dogs that were kind of world dogs in other part of the world. I mean, so most of these dogs just kind of live on their own. They're free roaming. Um, and then what has kind of been a movement more recently is to take these dogs out of this environment because, oh, the poor street dogs, and bring them to Western homes. So the problem with that is these dogs don't have a lot of the skills to be pets. They struggle when they're put into a pet environment with being on a leash. They struggle with confinement. They have high body autonomy, so they struggle with handling for medical needs. They can be very anxious when they don't have that ability to roam free. And then some of the other issues can be like leash reactivity, because again, they're like, what's a leash? And I've definitely seen some aggression to people and aggression to dogs,
Yep.
which is interesting because like they're going to be a group that like when they are free roaming, they communicate really well with each other and they have a lot of ritualized aggression to avoid. But when we take them out of
Yeah.
the environment and we put them on a leash, it totally changes things.
Yeah.
They can really, really, really struggle with being brought over as pets. I have seen, like, I worked with a rescue in New York that brought a lot of Gindos. And Gindos are a little bit more like bred for human companionship. They're like not really a land-raised breed, but they have a
Yeah.
lot of those, like, they have a lot of similar tendencies. But if they brought them over as puppies, they would do really, really well, like actually adapt
Yeah.
super well to city life. But some of the adults would really struggle. Um,
Yeah.
like I had I had a dog from Kuwait that they brought into New York City that just like really not handle it and was severely aggressive. So there's definitely a huge range, but they're very, very interesting dogs.
Very
They're
interesting.
quite,
I would even say I haven't worked with a lot of world dogs, but you know, just out of some of the traits that you've talked about, I could imagine that they're also probably a little less biddable in terms of less trusting, right? You know,
Ryan.
like, well, I don't know who you are, so I'm
Yeah,
not going to take food from you, and definitely a lot harder to build a bond with because that's not really in their genetics either. So I can imagine eye contact is hard. I can imagine space is hard, probably super spatially sensitive because of the body autonomy that you had mentioned. So that, yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me.
yeah, and
So
like if they come in as young dogs, they can adapt relatively well. But the adults that have grown up with a free roaming lifestyle have like a certain set of learning history that makes it really, really, really difficult for them.
really hard, yeah.
Yeah,
So
like even going
um,
through a doorway, they're like, that is a trap, right?
it's weird. Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah.
It's weird. I didn't put that doorway there. I don't want to. No, totally. Let's just real quick. We'll wrap it up and talk about mixed breeds. I myself have mixed breeds. I know that you've had mixed breeds. So this is where it starts to get interesting. We've already talked about how when we breed dogs on purpose, they'll still will be like you get your bulldog slash guardian breed, you get your toy slash terrier breed. So and that's done on purpose, you know. So then we get into the just absolute amalgamation of when it's not done on purpose and you really don't know what you're getting. I have an English Bulldog Amstaff mix. That's a showline dog mixed with another showline dog, but also all his genetics are very much Bulldog and Terrier. I've got a Chihuahua Maltese Pekingese mix. So we've got all these toy dogs, but he's got a little bit of that like Chihuahua nervousness, spatial pressure. He's got some alarm barking that he does, and it always takes everybody by surprise because he's such a quiet dog until he's
Right.
not. And then we're like, where did that come from? Genetics. And then I also have a Border Collie Jack Russell mix, Border Collie for cattle and Jack Russell for vermin hunting. And there is a lot of conflict in him that I
Right.
see in terms of where his genetics are just constantly battling each other. He likes conflict. He wants to fight. He gets into the fight. He doesn't like it. He's like, psych, never mind. I didn't want that. That was too intense. Loves to pattern, loves to work, but also like is a little sensitive about too many changes and will definitely shut down and be like, is it worth it to me? You know, is this fair? So
Uh,
what's your take on sort of mixed breeds and the
I
genetics
think
behind that?
when we're talking about genetics and mixed breeds, like one thing to bear in mind is like if you don't know the parentage for sure, the only way to tell is to do a DNA test, and
Yep.
is fairly accurate. Like there's a lot of cheaper ones that aren't very good, but if you wanted like accurate DNA tests, Embark is quite accurate. And
I like Embark, yeah.
I've seen a lot of like multi-generational mixes where the parentages are known that have been tested like generations down, and it is following and it's very accurate. So if you don't know, that would be a good thing to do. To bear in mind with mixes is like if you have like that Heinz 57 where it's just like there's nothing that's really over 30%, or like, you know, two dogs of the same, like similar group that combine to be over like 30%, that dog is just going to be the dog that you have, right? So they
Yeah.
might display bits and pieces from their genetic background, but it's like you can't really say, well, this dog's going to act like a lab because he's 12% lab, right? So the dogs that are like very, very mixed, it's just kind of like you're going to get little bits and pieces, and there's really no way to tell what is going to come out. But when you do have a mixed breed, if there is like a group or a breed that is, 30% or higher, that's kind of making up a good chunk of that DNA, you could expect to see some of the traits of that group. Tina is about 50% Spitz between Pomeranian and Esky. And then the rest is pit bull. So she has like very strong Spitz traits, and she has very strong like kind of pit bull traits. But if that she's like 14% Esky, if that was lab, probably none of that would show up, right?
Sure, yeah.
So if you have a dog that's really, really mixed, probably nothing is really going to be predominant. If you have like less mixed, you can expect traits from anything that's kind of taking up a higher percentage. And some they mix well, and sometimes they don't. Like if you have a very independent dog with high prey drive, and you mix them with a dog that is handler fittable but like high arousal, that could either go where it kind of like tones down the prey drive, or you can get a really amped dog that doesn't listen and wants to kill everything. So
yeah. I mean, and I think the important thing with this is like, even if you know the DNA and you know the parents, don't like put your dog into like a hole. There's some expectations that maybe you can like have your training plan, or your trainer can help you with a training plan. But at the end of the day, you still got to look at the dog as an individual. Like I have a border jack, and I know that he is very different from his litter mates. Mine is dog selective. Mine is loves to perform. You can hand him off to anybody. He'll do his job. His litter mate is, kind of shy of people, doesn't perform well, but super dog social.
Right.
So, then they're from the same litter. So, knowing the genetics is half the battle, but you still gotta like look at the dog that you have in front of you, because it's always a mixed bag.
You can't guarantee that even a purebred border collie is going to have those traits, because it's always on a bell curve, right? So there's going to be like sort of the general population, and that's kind of why we're saying, well, usually these dogs will behave like this, but you'll have outliers on both sides, always, right?
Absolutely. Okay. So I want to wrap it up there so that our show's not too long, since we're usually about a 30-minute show. But I think that we are now going to go into with our next show to talk about genetic tendencies and how we develop training plans around those in terms of like genetic outlets and whatnot.
Yeah.
Real quickly though, just on the mixed breed, I want you to mention, because we've talked about Kim Brophy's book, and I'll put it in our show notes as well. If you do not have the ability to do a DNA test,
yes,
it's just ultimately a guess, but she has like a system or something.
It's a tool online called the Dog Key, where you put in your dog's like very like generic physical traits, and like basically based off of that, it will give you an idea of like what group they might align to, as far
potentially be, yeah.
We just talked about. So it's pretty cool.
We'll definitely put that in our show notes. We'll probably end up getting some kind of linked up or something that we'll also put with our stuff. So real quick, let's go ahead and wrap up. How can they get in touch with you, Sarah?
Best way to find everything is on my website, which is www.bnrbc.ca. We are on social media and everything too. It's Barks and Recreation, and just make sure that you're finding the one that's in Trail, British Columbia.
I'm in Portland, Oregon. You can reach me at dognamics.com. That website will pretty much give you everything you need to know about me, contact, and social media. DOG, N as in Nancy, A, M as in Mary, ICS.com. And then in terms of our show, feel free to like and follow us on our social medias. We'll have it in the show notes. If you love what you're listening to, please share it with a friend, rate and review. It really, really does help us out. And feel free to start sending questions our way as well. We'll probably set up a point where we can start to do that. All right, that'll do it for today. I'll see you next time, Sarah.
Thanks. Bye.